Hi everyone, for those who don't know me, I'm David and I'm a journalist and communications specialist. I'm here today to talk to you about the positive, practical and progressive case for leaving the European Union and to dispel a few myths along the way. And first off, I'd like to talk about immigration and migration, ranked the second most important issue in this debate. Now, as a starting point, can we all please take it as read the vast majority of people voting in this referendum have no inherent problem with immigration or migration per se. People coming here from different countries and cultures have done wonders and shaped the country over the decades. But there are two key issues, and it is everything about numbers and having that element of control. It's crucially important because by knowing how many people are coming into the country, it helps the government plan and make other decisions that affect infrastructure, such as the number of homes we need, school places required and hospital beds necessary. By being in the EU, the free movement of people policy means that we have no control and therefore cannot properly plan. All member states have visa-free access to our public services. The government has repeatedly promised to bring net migration down to 100,000, and yet the Office for National Statistics estimates that net migration was in fact 330,000 last year, the second highest figure on record, and those are just the official estimates. By leaving, we could introduce a controlled immigration policy like in Australia, which awards people points for skills, training, age and health, to ensure we're giving people a home if they have something to offer us or if they have a genuine humanitarian need. But don't just base your decision on the here and now. 5 new countries are currently negotiating EU membership, including Ukraine and Turkey. Who knows which other countries will be negotiating with them in 10 years' time? Every time one joins, net migration will rise and we have no say over it. When is a tipping point for our public services? But that's just one aspect of this debate. I don't know about you, I tend to believe that all humans are equal. So why would you support a system which prioritises a man from Estonia over a lady from India? The EU's free movement of people policy frequently sees immigrants from outside of the European Union discriminated against, some with brilliant skills to offer this country. So why should someone have a greater right to come here just because they happen to have been born in an EU member state? Anyone that classes themselves as a humanitarian should feel great alarm at this. Now on to the economy, the top issue for people across most national polls. Now, I'm not here to twist things, but I'll start by saying that it is widely accepted that there will be a short period of economic uncertainty if Britain elects to leave. Nobody knows how long this period will last for, and that's predominantly because no country has ever left the EU in its current guise. There's simply too many variables to make an accurate prediction. It will largely depend on what our deal ends up looking like. However, in the medium and long term, Britain will be liberated. I'm going to tell you why. As MEP Daniel Hannan very correctly says, the European Union is obsolete. It's a hangover of an age when freight costs were high and refrigeration was expensive and regional trade blocks looked like the future. But this world has been made completely redundant by technological advance. This is the age of the internet, of cheap flights, of Skype. It's as easy to do business with a company in the Philippines as it is in France. Never before has geographical proximity been as irrelevant as now. So why, in an age of globalisation, do we tie ourselves to the one part of the world that is not experiencing significant economic growth? We don't sit on great natural resources. Buying and selling is what we do. And currently we're being constrained within a stagnated EU. We need to be where the customers are. And as long as we're in the European Union, we cannot even sign independent trade agreements with non-EU countries. Currently, an EU Trade Commissioner negotiates any new trade deals on our behalf. But it's not just on our behalf, they're negotiating on behalf of 27 other countries, all with different wants, needs, expectations and economies. This inevitably means it takes forever to get anything productive done, with talks frequently held up as member states squabble among themselves. And the problem isn't with the member states wanting what's best for their country, the flaw is with the system they're operating within. the EU is currently attempting to negotiate a free trade agreement with Australia. But this, unbelievably, has been put on hold because of a dispute with some Italian tomato growers. Now, these Italians may well have a very valid point, but it's a principle which is fundamentally wrong here. And the point is, how have we got ourselves into a situation where we are being prevented from forming a key trade agreement due to some tomato growers hundreds of miles away? In the last decade, many parts of the world have experienced significant economic growth. The only two continents that haven't are Antarctica and, you've guessed it, Europe and the EU, which is the same size now as it was in 2006. And in that period, our own exports to the EU have dropped by 10%. We're now the member state with the least reliance on them for trade. The government's own figures show that only 1 in 20 UK companies export to the EU, and yet every single UK business still has to obey by every EU rule and regulation. The consequences are painstakingly clear. It curtails innovation and it stifles growth, particularly with small and medium-sized businesses, which are the bedrock of our economy. Two leaders on the Remain campaign have spelt out exactly how we'll be liberated. Paddy Ashdown says if we leave, it'll mean cheaper food, and Lord Rose says if we leave, it'll mean higher wages. So when you next hear about a Britain in isolation, I simply ask you this. Do you think the Germans will suddenly stop selling us their high-quality cars? What about the Italians and their designing clothing? What about the French and Spanish with their produce and wine? The answer, of course, is no. Of course they won't. Trading is a reciprocal deal. Our economic reliance on the EU is falling, and that's a demonstrable fact. And yet, we're still bound by all the red tape which stops us negotiating our own lucrative deals. Free ourselves from this, and medium and long term, we will see the benefits unquestionably. When you next hear a prediction about economic Armageddon, just remind yourself of this. UK industry has been classified as being in recession on 3 separate occasions in the last 8 years. So how good really is the restrictive European Union for our economy? Thirdly, it's a matter of democracy. We fought a civil war in this country to establish the principle that laws should not be passed nor taxes raised except by our own elected representatives. And now supreme legislative and executive power is held not just by people that you didn't vote for, but by people that generally owe their positions to having just lost elections, like Peter Mandelson or Neil Kinnock. Only when they've been expressly rejected by the British people are they invited to come and legislate for us anyway. How can that be morally right? How could it be morally right that more than 10,000 workers at the European Union enjoy salaries greater than that of the UK Prime Minister? Gradually, we're handing more and more of our power to a European Commission who we have no control or direct say over. If an MP does something wrong, we hold a by-election and punish them at the polls. If a government creates enough ill feeling, we can vote them out at a general election. But how can you vote out Jean-Claude Juncker, the failed Luxembourg Prime Minister and now the President of the European Commission? You can't. How can you vote out Frans Timmermans? You can't. You probably don't even know who Frans Timmermans is, and you wouldn't be alone in thinking that, because therein lies the problem. These faceless men have no accountability at all. Up to 59% of our laws are now influenced in some way by Brussels. And to get a sense of where we're headed and what the EU stands for, you only have to step foot in the European Parliament's visitor centre. Right inside the entrance is a big mural on the wall which proudly declares that national sovereignty, i.e. the right of an individual state to govern itself, is a catastrophic evil, and that a federal union of the people is a remedy for that. Now, over the years, the media, Europhiles and politicians have gradually hammered home the delusion that if you want to leave the European Union, you're somehow anti-European, you're somehow a little Englander who wants to bring up the drawbridge and sail off into the mid-Atlantic. I work in communications, and I know just how powerful and persuasive the English language can be. Why else do you think the official designated Remain campaigners call themselves Britain Stronger in Europe? It perpetuates and embeds the myth that those of us against the EU are also against Europe. So let us be clear, Europe is a glorious continent of which we'll always be part of, The EU is an out-of-control political construct, and it's the latter which we're voting on. The EU has already proven through its flagship policy of the euro that its one-size-fits-all policies will never work on an industrial scale. Why? Because Europe is diverse. It has different cultures, customs, traditions, and importantly, economies that work differently. The EU's management of the Eurozone and its forced austerity on the likes of Greece has given just a glimpse of the possible trauma ahead if we were to vote in. Youth unemployment rates of 51% in Greece, 45% in Spain, 39% in Italy and 25% in France have now sadly become the norm. A whole generation of young people are paying the price for the EU's relentless pursuit of the disastrous single currency. It's the EU which is driving a wedge between countries and communities. And it's for this very reason that I firmly believe that if you're anti-EU, it actually makes you pro-European. I love Europe, and it angers me to see young people suffering because of EU policy. It strengthens my view that national sovereignty should never be eroded or destroyed. I'm adamant that decisions should be taken closer to people and not further away. A vote to leave is actually a vote for our European friends. Europe should once again function and trade as proper democracies without this supernatural power dictating to from above. A recent Ipsos Mori poll showed that 61% of Italians, 50% of the French and 39% of Swedes, one of the most pro-EU countries, now want their own referendum. Ordinary hard-working people have grown resentful of the EU. So do you want to be on the inside when it collapses, or do you want to help liberate the European people? Now there's lots of assumptions in this debate. So to make an informed decision, we need to look at what we do know. So we know that the EU has stagnated, and we know its flagship project, the Euro, has left economies across the Eurozone facing mass unemployment, social unrest and a rise in extreme right and left political parties. We know that UK industry has frequently dipped into recession whilst being in the EU. These are facts. We also know that one of the EU's key aims is expansionism. The EU comprises of 28 member states, with negotiations currently proceeding with an extra 5. History tells us that negotiations will not stop there and will extend to more countries in the future. This will mean we'll have to pay more in to get the same out. Our sway over decisions will decrease even further, and ultimately it means continued visa-free access for millions of extra people. Finally, we know the EU's overarching goal is to destroy national sovereignty and replace it with a United States of Europe, where all power is centralised by one common European army, judicial system and currency union. In 2012, the then Vice President of the European Commission, Viviane Reding, set out why we needed a United States of Europe. She said that upon mature reflection, I think the term United States of Europe is the most apt to find a broad acceptance and better reflects the ultimate destination of the EU. Before saying, ultimately, as a European Christian Democrat, I cannot allow my vision of the future to be dictated to by British Eurosceptics. Don't be in any confusion about what a vote to remain means and where we're headed. And so, having looked at the evidence, there are two options on your ballot paper. And remember, there's no status quo in this debate. Whatever you choose, things will change. Option number 1 is ever closer political and fiscal union with the EU. British laws will increasingly be made outside of Britain by people who you don't recognise. By voting Remain, you are giving the European Commission their strongest mandate to date to press ahead with these aims. Remain has claimed that we need to be in the EU to change it, but looking at the EU's evolution from 1973 to present day, and it's clear that this wish is nothing more than a charade. Even with our Trump negotiation card of an EU referendum on the table, David Cameron returned from Brussels with a deal which actually delivered nothing legally binding whatsoever. Bearing that in mind, do you honestly think that after voting to stay in, Mr Juncker and co will be in the mood to sit around the table and start entertaining the prospects of fundamental reform? It's a laughable suggestion. By voting to remain, you are sending a message to the EU that they can act with impunity. Now option 2 is this. take back power from Brussels and choose to live in a land where we are governed by our own laws and can shape our own destiny, just as we did successfully for thousands of years pre-EU. If you don't like a particular government, that's your cue to become politically active and argue the case for new lawmakers. That's the beauty of democracy. And if you look at UK electoral history, this is what we do, regularly flitting between Conservative, Labour and coalition governments. Nowhere else in the world do people apologise for wanting to live under their own laws. We are the world's 5th largest economy, the 4th military power. We have industry-leading hospitals and universities, a financial hub of London which is envied across the globe, and we benefit from huge natural advantages, such as the world's business language being English. How much bigger do we have to be before we have the confidence to raise our eyes to more distant horizons and free ourselves from the shackles of this political empire? And that makes it a no-brainer for me. If you can see that the European Union is fundamentally flawed, if you believe in fairness and transparency, if you believe in people like you and I having more power to shape things that affect us, if you believe in global trade and broadening our possibilities, and if you believe in Great Britain and its ability to achieve so much more, you'll vote Leave on June the 23rd. Those are your 2 options, and this is your once-in-a-lifetime chance to ensure that hope triumphs over fear. Thank you.